was recently traveling in France with an amazing group of women, and we went to see Monet's house in Giverny, France. So I thought I would tell you about it because his house is so special. The cool thing about an artist's house is that it plays a dynamic part in the creative process. So when Monet moved to this house, he was a starving artist. He had to ask for money for food so he could move his family there. And he had 2 children, and his wife had recently died, and he had a new partner, Alice, and she had a bunch of kids too. So between them, they moved to this new house. The main reason Monet moved to this house is because his old one was not visually inspiring. And I think it's interesting to think about how he became a thriving artist here. He lived here till he died. And is there an interplay between a house and how you create? And I think there is. So I think it's interesting to look at his home. Monet lived here for 43 years, so half of his life. Alice had 6 kids, so between them there was a total of 8. It was a lot of energy, and the house has a lot of energy. Each room is a different color, and he was really playing with how color affects a room. He was testing how saturation shapes a space, and he was really interested in how light is reflected off objects. You could see that in his art. I mean, he was obsessed with his pond because he liked to see it every day. It was a little bit different because the light shone differently on the water. So before Monet lived there, the house was originally a cider farm, which I think is kind of interesting. So in 1883, Monet moves to this house, and one of the very first things he does is plant flowers, which I love. And the garden now is so inspiring. They hired 10 gardeners, and they really keep it up, which is amazing because not all old houses that you tour is like this beautiful in the garden. Monet transformed the garden, and he originally hired 6 gardeners of his own. The orchard was really neglected, and he brought it back to life. In 1893, Monet bought more land that connected to his land, and this is what housed the new pond and more of his garden. And the city actually diverted water so he could have his pond. By then, he was more of a successful artist. And at first, he was not planning on painting his pond. He just wanted it to inspire him. And now you know that his pond is one of the most famous things that he ever painted. When Monet was decorating his house in the late 1800s, the style was very stuffy, very formal, very traditional, dark colors, heavy tapestry, velvet, and Monet went totally against that, and I kind of love it. And he did choose the colors in each room. He chose the decoration, and he paid people to execute his ideas. Monet preferred a more simple way of decorating. He really liked to use local items, which I think is cool because that's kind of popular now. And there are a lot of things with Eastern touches, so you'll see furniture with bamboo on it and a lot of Japanese art. Okay, one of my favorite rooms is the dining room because it's that strong yellow, and everything in that room is mostly painted the yellow, and even a lot of the furniture like the china hutches, the chairs, those are also yellow, so all coordinates. And if you notice the curtains in this room, they were light in color. Monet liked to let in as much light into the house as possible because, again, he was really interested in how light reflected off items. And I personally like a lot of light in my houses, so I really resounded with that choice. So in the dining room, you're going to see that Monet collected Japanese prints. Monet was really interested in how the Japanese artists used color and line and also negative space. So those artists really inspired him, and although he was an impressionist artist, he was using those ideas that they presented in those prints to make his art even more dynamic. Monet had a lot of artist friends like Rodin, Picasso, and he would have them over for dinner. So he has a big dining room, he has a big family, and that's where they would all eat. Monet liked to stick to a very strict schedule with meals, so they were always at the same time. He would wake up and right away have his first meal, and then lunch at 11:30 and dinner at 7. You could not be late to these meals. That was very rude, and a gong was struck and you were expected to come right on time to eat your food. Monet really believed that a successful meal started with beautiful dishes, so he collected a lot of blue and white dishes, and then he would set the table with a white tablecloth so the dishes would really pop against the white tablecloth. So off of the dining room is the kitchen, and this is another strong color story because it's the blue with the blue and white tile, the copper pots. It's so beautiful. And the funny thing is Monet really didn't spend a lot of time in here because he hired a cook. And he traveled a lot to paint. So he'd go somewhere, paint, and then he would eat the local food and ask for the recipe. And then he'd bring that home to his cook and ask her to make it for his family. So he had a good collection of recipes that he brought from his travels, which I think is cool. In this room, the focal point is the range. It's really big and really beautiful. So the blue salon is a small room, but it's actually where the family gathered. And in those days, you used a lot of furniture that could be rearranged. So it's like small pieces. So you could play games or move the sofa over to the fire to read a book. So the furniture was really movable in that way. The pale blue in this room creates a really peaceful and calming feeling. This is also the room where Monet would house his books. So it was his library as well, and he liked to have books on botany and art, and so he'd reference those in this room. We also have the epicary, and it doesn't look like much because there's not much in here, but this is the room that was used to house linens, spices, coats, dry goods, and linens. It's green with touches of lavender and blue. The furniture in this room has mostly a bamboo motif, which is really beautiful because Monet loved the Far East. It felt very sophisticated to him. Japan had been isolated until the US Navy arrived in 1852, and it opened up Japan to trade. Japanese artists had been creating art there, and nobody else had seen it. So suddenly everybody could see this beautiful art that had a lot of harmony in it and symmetry, and that, like I said, really inspired Monet. And so you can see he used their motifs, not just their art, in his house. Connected to the house is the studio drawing room, so you kind of have to go down some stairs, but it was really exciting to go in there and see the art. The art is actually all replicas that they had made. They're not original Monets. Before I went to his house, I actually went to a museum to see his art in real life because I really wanted to see it and get the whole immersive experience, and I would actually really recommend that. In the studio, there was a lot of space on the walls to hang art, and he loved that. He liked hanging his art on the wall and really thinking about it. And it was very big, so this was also a room he used as a sitting room and for entertaining. There was a lot of light in this room, but Monet really didn't use it often for painting in. He preferred to paint outside in the element where the items were that he was painting. The studio also served as a gallery for unsold art, so visitors would come to his house and they could see his art there and buy it. The studio had a desk where Monet liked to write his letters, so whenever he would travel, he would write his wife Alice letters, and he would write his friends that were painters and writers, and it was really important for him to keep up with the people he loved. Okay, another room I really loved is Monet's bedroom, and if you notice in here, the walls are a cream color. He had a lot of energy in his house with his children, and he had a lot of color in his life with his art, so his bedroom was where he got away from it all and where it was calm and he could get re-energized. In his room, you're going to notice that the art on the wall is not his art. It was actually the art of his friends, and they would give it to him and he put it up so it could inspire him. As Monet got more popular, he had more money and he upgraded his furniture, and you can really see that in this room. He has two pieces that are from the 18th century Rococo pieces, and they're really beautiful. Monet would plan his day by looking out the window in his bedroom and seeing if it was nice enough weather that he could paint outside. He loved painting outside, and on the days that it was raining or just not good enough weather for him to go out, he was really depressed, and sometimes he would stay in bed and someone would have to bring him food on a tray to eat, which I found slightly relatable. So as I told you, Monet was really inspired by the Japanese culture, and one thing he learned from them is a deep love of nature. So that's why he spent so much time working on his pond and his gardens. He created a Japanese water garden with a Japanese style bridge, and it's still there and so gorgeous, painted green, very fun. So Monet never stopped painting the scene of the bridge or the water lilies, and his art actually became really popular in Japan, which I think is interesting, and maybe it's because he was so inspired by their art that they also loved what he created. I thought Monet's house was a really good example of the interplay between an artist's home and what he paints. So his house doesn't look like his paintings, but it was definitely where he experimented with color even more. And so I thought it was so beautiful to see each room. Each room was like an immersive experience because you were just covered in color. which was really fun. And then the gardens were so beautiful and inspiring. After I went through the house, I went through it twice. I went through the gardens, and then my sister and I, we sat in the garden, and I got my watercolors out and I did a little painting, and it was so amazing. I would definitely go back there. So if you're going to Paris, it's really great. It's like an hour out of town, and you can stay in the countryside for a few days and slow down. I totally recommend it. Anyway, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and let me know if you liked this kind of video. I was so excited to see his house, and so I just want to share it with you.